It is not too often these days that we come on the air with any good news coming out of the United States Supreme Court. But today, the High Court handed Donald Trump a trio of big losses. The first, a win for the defenders of democracy. The Supreme Court ruled that Mississippi mail-in ballots that are postmarked by Election Day, but that arrive within 5 days, still should be counted as state law allows. It is a major blow to Donald Trump's all-out war against mail-in voting. Mark Elias, who argued that case, will join us momentarily. The second ruling today declares that Donald Trump does not have the power to fire a target of his ire. That would be Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook from the central bank, at least for now. And thirdly, the one that's likely to sting Donald Trump the most, the court declined to take up a case by Donald Trump to review the $5 million civil judgment that he sexually abused and defamed the writer E. Jean Carroll, which means that the jury's verdict still stands and Donald Trump must pay E. Jean Carroll the $5 million he owes her plus interest. Now, that was the good news from the Supreme Court, and we'll get into all three of those significant wins in a second. But because this is the Supreme Court, that's not the whole story. There's also a major setback as another ruling threw away 91 years of precedent. In a 6-3 ruling on Trump versus Slaughter, the Supreme Court gave Donald Trump the authority to fire most of the government's independent regulators. This shifts even more power toward Donald Trump and the executive branch. The specific case deals with Donald Trump's March 2025 firing of Rebecca Slaughter, the former commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission, but it impacts dozens of agencies that are supposed to be politically independent. The Supreme Court, which already ruled in 2024 that Donald Trump is immune from criminal prosecution, now gives him and any president more authority, which Justice Sonia Sotomayor torched in a scathing dissent, which she read from the bench earlier today. When she did that, she seemed emotional and was visibly angry. From Sotomayor's dissent, quote, "Today, this court undoes centuries of political practice and concludes that all three branches of government have been acting in open defiance of the Constitution all this time. Its conclusion is wrong. The text of the Constitution, along with its history, the longstanding practices of the political branches, and the precedents of this court make clear that Congress may limit the causes for which the heads of commissions like the FTC can be removed by the president. In holding otherwise, the court gives the president a power unknown even to the English crown, against which the founders revolted, elevating him above his once co-equal branches by transforming a duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed into a license to act in defiance of those very laws." Justice Sotomayor says that the majority's theory in this case, quote, "promises to unleash only chaos." Justice Sotomayor's dissent and that promise of chaos is where we begin today with a woman who sued the Trump administration for firing her from the Federal Trade Commission, Rebecca Slaughter. Also joining us, former top official at the DOJ, our legal analyst, Andrew Weissmann, is here. Rebecca, your reaction to both the decision and Justice Sotomayor's warning?
Well, I'm really disappointed, honestly, Nicole, not so much for myself, but for an institution that I was incredibly honored to serve, and more importantly, for the American people who expect their government to work for them and not just for the rich and powerful. What the court did today was hand an enormous amount of power to the president, taking it away from Congress, and that's power that will enable government institutions to work on behalf of President Trump or any president so that these government agencies that Congress set up to be economic watchdogs will turn into lapdogs.
Rebecca, let me read you more from Justice Sotomayor's dissent, which I've said this before, but she is, I feel like, writing to all of us, to the American people, with these warnings and these almost woeful worries about what the court is ushering in. She writes this: "Perhaps worst of all, the court today forgets its place. For most of our history, the court has rightly left the removal question primarily to its co-equal branches. Today's majority, however, decides that it knows better than members of the founding generation who created agencies like the Sinking Fund Commission and the Bank of the United States. free from unfettered presidential control. Better than a century and a half of Congresses and presidents, starting with Grover Cleveland and continuing into the 21st century, who created agencies in the FTC's mold. Better than even Hamilton, Story, Webster, Holmes, Brandeis, Frankfurter, and Rehnquist. These great statesmen and justices knew something that today's majority apparently does not. That fealty to the Constitution means respecting not just what it says, but what it does not say, and by its silence leaves to others to decide. It also means respecting precedent, not as a wooden exercise, but out of recognition that whatever our confidence in the theories of the present moment, the wisdom of our founding document does not belong to today's justices alone. Because the court ignores these foundational tenets and in doing so upends rather than upholds the separation of powers, I respectfully dissent. She writes such a startling analysis of what the court has done, how active it is in this decision. One, do you agree with that? And two, what does it mean for where we're heading?
I think Justice Sotomayor gets it exactly right. And I'll point out that she held a consistent position in my case and in Lisa Cook's case, which is that these laws that have been on the books for centuries and date back to our founding are valid and that it's important. They're important parts of the separation of powers. It is incredibly difficult to reconcile the two majority opinions in that case, of which only two justices, the Chief and Justice Kavanaugh, were in both decisions, which the best way you can understand them is to say, yes, we should not have removal protections, except at the Fed, because Wall Street is different. And I think that's part of the message that comes out of the court today that's really disturbing. I think she's absolutely right about all of the different kinds of chaos it will unleash and how ahistorical a decision that this is. And Justice Gorsuch, in his concurrence, talks a little bit about, wait, actually, maybe Congress wouldn't even have set up these agencies and given them the power that it gave them if it didn't believe that they would have the checks inherent in their structure. And I think he's exactly right about that. It's very disturbing, and it's something we should really be worried about, not because we're all in the weeds about what the different alphabet soup of agencies is, but because we want a government that works for the people and not just for the powerful.
Well, since you've been fired, we've seen Trump do what he wishes. I mean, now that this decision has been released, he's posted about it, he's claiming a political victory. What happens now? What do you think he'll do?
Well, I think what we will see is what we have seen at these other agencies since he started on this removal crusade. Because I think what's important to remember is this isn't just about whether there are minority commissioners at these commissions, but about whether all of the commissioners are answer to the rule of law rather than answer a call of loyalty to the president. So, for example, at the FCC, which has been on this massive and disturbing retribution campaign against speech that the president doesn't like, that's exactly the kind of thing that is empowered by this decision, and the kind of thing about which I am really, really concerned.
What will you do to, I mean, what is the mechanism for undoing this? Is it a new set of laws? Is it reforms around a new leader, a new executive? I mean, it seems that all of your comments have pointed to how the American people are the real victims in this decision. What does the reform look like?
So I think it's really important to remember that what the Supreme Court said today is that one type of check, removal protections, is not constitutional. I think they got it wrong. We're not going to stop talking about how they got it wrong, but that is one type of check. There are still other checks, and many of them come from Congress and need to come from Congress. So what I think we really need is a Congress made up of members of both parties that will reassert its institutional prerogative and really constitutional responsibility that it has been leaving by the wayside to provide the checks and balances that our Constitution intended. And that can look like use of the power of the purse. That looks like oversight and investigations. That can look like withholding confirmations if they think the executive is abusing power, as they did at the Fed. So I think what we need to see is much more robust activity from Congress and creative thinking about new laws that can incentivize the same kinds of checks and balances that removal protections have served to provide for the centuries since our founding.
So that's on the other side. In the next 2 years, how much damage can Trump and his administration do in the wake of this ruling?
I think enormous amounts of damage, and we are already seeing that damage. We're seeing mergers that look like they get approved based not on whether they are good for the American people, but on what lobbyist is working on the deal and how well connected they are to the Trump administration. We're seeing efforts that I referenced to silence political dissent and speech that the president finds disfavorable. And the list goes on. And I think at the end of the day, we have to remember that this really hurts Americans in their pocketbook. These alphabet soup of agencies that Congress set up to have this similar structure of independent boards and commissions have a common thread. And the common thread is that they're economic watchdogs. They're there to make sure that the American economy is working for the people and not just for the rich and powerful. And what we've seen instead since the beginning of this presidency is enormous favors being handed out to those rich and powerful oligarchs who, for example, surrounded the president at his inauguration. And nothing getting better for the American people who are struggling to make rent, to provide health care, to feed their children, to keep their kids safe online. That's all important work that the FTC should be doing, and it should be doing it without fear or favor.